it not as good, but it's close. Like there's a whole civilization out here, man. And so like it's really important. Making this album was really important for like we coming together and creating a sense of commonality where the first person meets the next person to show that there could be a common ground in our relations and all. So yeah.
And I want to add to that really quick. You know, as believers, with the how fragmented the world is, you know, we have the responsibility of taking the charge in reconciliation. That's our responsibility. You know, the world has the mainstream world has the right ideas, uses the right language, just leaves out the most necessary ingredient in order to accomplish the goal. Because we're using the same language as the world: unity, reconciliation, love. All of us are using the same verbiage. We just either mean something different by what we're saying, or we mean the same thing and don't necessarily know how to accomplish it. And I think that the missing piece in these conversations about reconciliation, about unity, about empathy, and understanding, that's the conversation that the church should actually be leading in terms of how do we get there? We all agree on the what. How we get there is where so much of the challenge. So how we get there and how we got to where we are the two things that we disagree on, that we have struggled with having commonality on. And so I think what Limo and I seek to do, and obviously music just provides a platform for us to do this, to speak into, to talk to, to speak into these real life, big picture issues. And if there's anything that we can talk about right now, it's reconciliation, it's unity, but from the vantage point of the scriptures, from the Christian perspective. And I think that what that does is it adds the missing piece into the dialogue. And so that's, I just wanted to add that to what Limo said.
I mean, well, that's important what you said. And I think that it kind of goes into the follow-up question that I had, as in, what would you guys' response be to those who feel like mentioning those aforementioned events being counterproductive and divisive to the body?
I would say that, number one, divisiveness is a choice, right? Like, in other words, we have to choose to be divided. Disagreement is not synonymous with divisiveness. And I think those two sometimes get conflated, that we think that to disagree is the same as having to be divided, and it's not. In fact, the opposite is true, right? I believe that we will disagree, and this is a bigger conversation, but I believe that disagreement is something that will follow us into eternity, okay? But so again, that's a bigger conversation to have at another time. But I don't think that once we get into the eternal state, we agree on everything. I think the thing that will be absent from the eternal state is the divisiveness that sometimes accompanies disagreement. And that's the challenge we have right now. It's not the fact that we're disagreeing. That's never a problem. Disagreement has never been a problem, right? Even from God's vantage point, to have an exchange of ideas where you see things one way and somebody else sees that very same thing another way. That's actually what makes the world go round. That's a plurality of thoughts and ideas, and we need that. Like, that makes the world beautiful. You follow me? It's what makes relationships between men and women so dynamic and so colorful. And so, you understand what I'm saying? That's not the problem. The problem is that we have a very hard time disagreeing without being divided. And so I think that we have to start there. In other words, it's only divisive if you choose for it to be so. You see what I'm saying? Because disagreement is healthy and necessary for growth. It's necessary and helpful for if we're going to be rounded as people and rounded as communities. And so I think that it's that's a misnomer. It's a misinterpretation of what it means to have a difference of opinion. And yeah,
for sure. I mean, we could do like a whole session just on that question alone, man. That was beautiful. Those are some beautiful answers. We'll move on for now. Limo, I got a question for you. So a few weeks back, you were on Community During Chaos with our man Justin over here to talk about COVID and NSARS in Nigeria. Can you give us any sort of update on what the state of the nation is right now, and have things calmed down at all since the weeks that have passed?
The only thing that isn't happening is no protests are happening. I mean, there are talks here and there of people wanting to protest, but everyone is scared to protest because, like, the narrative was so swiftly changed. Because at the start of it all, it was young people coming out to peacefully protest. The protest was hijacked. I'm not going to come here. I don't want to name. I don't want to, like, drop names. I don't want to put myself in trouble. But obviously, the protest was hijacked and the narrative was changed to make it seem like the peaceful protesters became violent. So everyone now is scared to protest, to come out, and the government, the police is saying anybody who comes out will be dealt with harshly because they're like trying to go against the peaceful coexistence of the nation and stuff like that. So everyone is really just back in themselves, and nothing has changed. In all honesty, police brutality is still happening, probably even worse, because it's like there's a vendetta right now. Like, it's worse than it was before. And the only glimmer of hope right now is the fact that there's a UK Parliament sitting and discussing the events that took place in the past month, and you're talking about like meeting sanctions to leaders in government and in the military and in the police station and in the police force. I think that's the only thing that looks hopeful right now. But yeah, the situation didn't change. Everything is still the same and probably worse. And nobody has the right. It's almost like the right to protest has been taken away from us.
Sorry to hear that, man. We'll keep praying for you on the state side, and we got to do the work to get more educated on what's going on over there, man, because like you said, we're generally uneducated on what's going on in not only Africa, but all the other continents. So we have a responsibility to really get involved to the best of our ability.
Truth, in light of the historical subject matter, including segregation, redlining, and even Chris Columbus that comes up in the intermission, how close do you feel to any of your heritage in Africa? Has there been an effort to go back and rediscover some of that culture that was lost because of colonialism?
I don't feel that. I know that, I do know that so much has, well, let me give a context to this. Part of why I don't feel that may be because and Limo knows this, I've been going back and forth to Africa almost every year since 2007. And when I go anywhere from 2 weeks to 5 weeks at a time. And so there's so much that I do feel like I know, that I've learned. I have a lot of relationships with people out there. I soak. I've always kind of been a sponge and absorbed from. I have friends out there that are part of, that are leaders of, and with RZIM, that's Ravi Zacharias International Ministry. So the conversations have been going on for years for me, and maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Part of why, when I say part of it, I mean part of why I don't feel the need to like reclaim or reconnect. But I will say that I do understand, however, the sense of loss that people of color, African Americans particularly, are feeling and experiencing in that having that sense of disconnectedness. It almost seems like everybody except us out here, because we have been historically displaced, culturally displaced. It seems like every other culture, every other nationality has that sense of connectivity, except for us. When a person lives in the States and you refer to them as Irish American, they take ownership of both of those as kind of dual citizens, when an African Americans have a difficult time taking full ownership of both of those at the same time. Those two, it almost seems like those two are contradictory. Like there's a juxtaposition there, which kind of stirs up in us this turbulence. Like we just feel uneasy, and so I think that I totally get it. And I think that disconnectedness is a large part of the reason why people are even migrating back to, ancestralism and migrating to, just really any other religion that is perceived to be non-Western in its heritage. That's a large part of the reason why people are moving away from Christianity, because it's viewed as something other than non-Western. And so I personally don't have that feeling of, man, I want to reclaim my identity, or that feeling of, man, I feel disconnected from my roots. I don't have that feeling, but I totally understand all the people who do. I understand why. I even understand why they see our faith as because people can't see our faith outside of the colonial context. People have a very difficult time seeing a pre-colonial Christianity and what the skin wrapped around a pre-colonial Christianity actually looked like. So I don't have that experience. I understand why others do though.
All right. T.R.U.T.H, this question's also for you. So in a recent episode of Southside Rabbi with KB and Amin Hudson, Cross Movements Fanatic talked about this sort of general assumption that everybody in CHH and white evangelicals and everyone in the Christian community just kind of assumed everyone was on the same page about what social justice meant in the earliest days of CHH. Do you agree with Fanatic that you also had that assumption when you were coming up in the early days?
I'm not sure if I understand what he meant by that.
So just to clarify, he explained it like this. He said when CHH was in its earliest origins, there was this assumption that black and brown kids and the rappers who were doing everything had the same definition of social justice, and the white evangelical community was on the same page. Would you say that you assumed the same thing in the earliest days of your career?
The way that I saw social injustice. Well, first of all, I didn't have a category for white evangelicalism back then. Yeah. So that's one. Two, I did have a view on it in a sense, and it was lopsided. The view that I had then was lopsided because because I don't have that natural fight in me for social justice. I do hate the spirit of the injustices, which is what I speak to a lot if you hear me talk. And I do, all the people who do, I'm very good friends with many of the people who are actually on the ground as activists. But I personally don't have that. The lion in me doesn't come out, when it comes to social justice issues, except for because I'm an apologist by nature. So except for when I see how the issues of social justice impact a person's faith, like for example, like to kind of like what I was saying earlier, when I see how when I start connecting dots and seeing how white evangelicalism and the disconnect from that sense of disconnectedness that people of color, black and brown people have had from their roots and what whites have done with our faith. This is how it translates into, this is how it translates into, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the mass defection that we see in Christianity. That's when I kind of raise up. So that natural thing has never really been in me for social, and that might sound taboo to a lot of people, but it's just honest. So I think that, but the way that I saw it before was back then, 10, 15 years ago, was I back then the fight was, that's called the liberation gospel. That's what they called it. Like, and the liberation gospel, like social justice back then was called liberation gospel. That's how the white evangelical community kind of labeled it. And I think I kind of bought into that. but it has a negative connotation on it, because liberation theology has this connotation that Christianity is man-centered, right? Which